Howdy, author Brian S. Pratt here again. I'm reading the Morcyth Saga, one chapter at a time with commentary. So, today we are at chapter 6. Recap thus far, James is in the New World. He found his way to Trindle, and he's staying at Corbin and Mary's house with, they have a son, Devin, and two small girls. And he has just they had some missing people. He located them, and they were being captured and killed by an evil presence that had been summoned long ago. And he managed to rescue the little girl. Everyone else had already perished, and defeated the evil spirit, demon, whatever it happened to be. It was never actually specified what it was. Anyway, now he's back at Mary and Corbin's house, recuperating. And let's begin. Over the next 2 days, James took it easy, sleeping through most of the first, only awakening when Mary brought a plate of eggs and potatoes. During breakfast of the second day, he spied the girls peeking through the doorway. Their giggling alerted their mother, who immediately shooed them away. "Let the boy eat in peace." "Rest," she said to him. "It's the best thing for you." He nodded and closed his eyes. As she passed through the doorway, James heard Mary berate her girls again for bothering him. Apparently they hadn't shooed very far, as little girls won't. He couldn't help but grin. He had come to like Corbin and his family. They had definitely done everything they could to make him feel welcome while he stayed with them. The redness and welts caused by the black cloud had all but disappeared. He felt much better after having rested the day before. He managed to fall asleep again and remained so until Mary brought lunch. The sound of her approaching his bedside prompted him to open his eyes. In one hand she carried a bowl of soup, and in the other a cup of water. When she saw he was awake, she asked, "How are you feeling?" "Better," he replied, as he sat up. She set the glass of water on the nightstand and handed him the bowl and a spoon. The aroma coming from the soup made his stomach growl. He took the spoon and eagerly scooped out a portion. "Very good." Mary beamed at the praise. Taking a seat on the edge of the bed, she inspected his injuries. "We were worried. Corbin said that when they found you, he thought you were dead." He gave her a grin. I can imagine. Sad about Hearn and Joshua. He was a joy to have around, she said softly. "At least you were able to help Leanna. Is she all right?" Mary nodded. "Her father says that she is much more subdued than what she used to be. Our priest thinks after some time has passed, she will gradually regain much of her youthful exuberance." A pause, then. "She used to be such a happy girl." "After what she went through," began James, "I can imagine it taking some time for her to recover." She sighed and nodded. "Yes, we are thankful she is still alive." His bowl was soon empty. She took it, and as she left the room, told him to get more sleep. He lay in bed for a while, but sleep was unattainable. It wasn't long before he concluded that he was not going to fall asleep any time soon. Thankfully, the throbbing in his head, which was unbearable the day before, had now subsided to a dull ache. He started to think that he might enjoy living again. Tired of being stuck in bed, he decided to get up and stretch his legs, wobbly though they were. Moving slowly, he swung his legs over the bed and attempted to stand. When he gained his feet, dizziness came on abruptly until he had to sit down on the bed. He held his head in his hands to calm the dizziness and the slight increase in pain. He took several deep breaths. The dizziness subsided after a minute or so, and he again attempted to get to his feet. He managed it without the sudden onslaught of dizziness and worsening of his headache. Feeling only slightly dizzy and unsteady, he refused to give in to weakness and shuffled to his chair where his clothes were and got dressed. Once dressed, he walked out into the front area. He found Mary sitting at the table mending a pair of trousers. "Where is everyone?" he asked, coming to the table. "The kids are out in the fields, and Corbin went to the house to help the others raise it to the ground." She put the trousers down and eyed him. "Can't sleep?" Shaking his head, he replied, "Not tired. I'm feeling much better, too. Your soup really hit the spot. I think I'll take a little walk to stretch my legs and get some fresh air." "Sienna's outside playing with the dogs." As she picked up the trousers, she added, "If you should see her, tell her I would like her to come help me." "Sure will," he agreed and went outside. He looked for Sienna, but there was no sign of her or the dogs. Enjoying the warmth of the summer, he decided to find a comfortable grassy spot near the pond where he could sit and relax. The ducks had since traveled on, so he just laid back and watched the clouds go by, enjoying the peace and quiet. The warm sun soon soothed his weary body. Before he even realized it, he fell asleep. Plunk, plunk. The sound of stones striking the pond surface awakened him. Thinking Sienna had joined him, he opened his eyes and glanced over to greet her. The whimsical greeting he was about to say died on his lips. Not 3 feet away sat the little creature with the blue vest and crazy felt hat he met when he first arrived in this world. Awake, are we? Enjoying yourself? Not sure how to respond, he replied. I've had better days than the last few. The creature chuckled. I'm sure you have, but you've done well. My master is pleased. Curious, James asked, just who might your master be? I haven't been directed to tell you as yet. Plunk. Another stone struck the water, sending ripples across the surface. Holding up his hand, the creature said, nor have I been given permission to answer any of your questions. Reaching into his vest pocket, the creature removed a silver medallion on a chain and tossed it to him. This is for you. Consider it to be a gift of sorts. James caught the medallion. He examined it and found one side had a raised pattern that looked like a stylized star. Turning it over, James discovered the back to be smooth without design. What is this? Like I said, a gift. Though should you desire, you may give it away or sell it, though I'd advise against that at this time. You may need it later on. Plunk. What do you mean, later on? James did not like the prospect of what that phrase foretold. Later on, as in a future time, explained the creature with a grin. What am I supposed to do now? Obviously, I'm here for some purpose. Would you care to enlighten me? Just do what you feel is right, and I'm sure everything will turn out for the best. Yeah, and if I think it feels right to toss the medallion into the pond, should I? He demanded irritably. He wanted some answers, not all this cryptic stuff. Not supposed to answer questions, remember? The creature stood up. You should be fine. I'll see you later on. I'll check in on you. With that, he hopped in the air and disappeared just like he had before. James stared at the spot where the creature had just stood for a moment before lying back on the grass. He examined the medallion more closely and mulled over his choices. The design looked to be the same as the one that had been on the cover of the book he inexplicably lost back in the forest. The loss of the book still bothered him. He could sure use it now. He wondered again why he was in this world, not to mention what forces had brought him there. It was difficult to believe that it was for nefarious reasons. The creature had told him to do what you feel is right. Hardly the device one would expect a meaning of evil to give. But still, you never knew. All right. So, James has the medallion with a star design on it. So, the giving of the amulet basically says you got the job. In that moment, the portal and the office back in Haviston, back on Commercial Avenue, is gone. It's no longer there. No more people from that, because when James receives the amulet, he's been fully hired. He passed all the tests, and the test was that house that with the evil spirit. His boss had to make sure he was up to what lay ahead, and if he couldn't manage to do first, he had to manage to survive the forest. If he couldn't do that, he wouldn't be strong enough to do the job. Then he had to learn magic. If he couldn't do that, he couldn't overcome the evil force in the house. And if you couldn't overcome the evil force in the house, then you failed your job, your training, and then they would keep working on somebody else. But he did, so he got the job. And at this point, no more people from Earth are coming over. How many already passed over? That remains to be seen. But he's been there for what, 4 days? And who knows how long it's been going on before he actually went to the interview. Before his grandfather saw the ad and passed and gave it to him, in his lunch sack. So could be more people, may not be. We'll just have to see. And Yeah. So that's um, that's it. So let's continue with this story, because he still doesn't know what he's there for. He still doesn't know why he's there for, and that's the way I wanted it. I didn't want the reader to know what was going on. I mean, I could have built it up so you knew exactly where he was going, or you knew exactly what was going to happen, but I I always felt when I read stories that it was much more interesting to not know, to have it just unfold. And maybe that's part of the charm of the Morcyth saga. You don't know what's going on. You don't, I mean, until the last few chapters of the last book, you really don't know why he's there. So, okay, one second. I got that throat. Oh, my morning caffeine. All right, let's continue. He wasn't sure how long he spent mulling things over, but before long, he heard Mary's voice calling everyone to dinner. Coming to his feet slowly, he made his way back to the house. He put the medallion around his neck for safekeeping and tucked it inside his shirt. When he returned to the house, he didn't mention the little creature or the medallion. That night after dinner, as he tried falling asleep, he couldn't stop thinking about the medallion and why it was given him. There must be a reason, he insisted. There has to be. Sometime before drifting off to sleep, he concluded that answers needed to be found for the many questions that plagued him. He also believed that the answers would most likely not be uncovered in the sleepy village of Trindle. Early the next morning, he found Corbin and family eating breakfast. "Good morning, all," he said as he approached the table. "Feeling better this morning?" Corbin asked. Mary brought a plate for James, and he helped himself to the eggs and biscuits. "Much better, thank you. It was probably Mary's cooking that did the most good." James flashed her a smile. "Always compliment the cook. I can't stress that enough. Be sincere about it, but always tell the cook they did a good job. If they're feeding you, be thankful, right?" He sat quietly at the table, absent-mindedly picking at his eggs and biscuits while trying to come up with the right words to say. "Something on your mind, James?" Corbin asked. "You seem a bit preoccupied, barely even touched your breakfast." Realizing that he had been pushing his food around, he said, "Well, as much as I have enjoyed your hospitality, I think it's time for me to be moving on. I wondered if you could come into town with me and help me select traveling gear." He took a bite of his eggs while waiting for Corbin's reply. Corbin eyed him for a moment, then nodded. "I guess I could do that. Where are you planning to go, if you don't mind my asking?" "I'm not sure where anything is in this area. Where is the nearest major city?" "The closest city of any size is Bern. It lies 2 days south along the Kellowan River. 3 days farther, you'll find Castle Cardry out on the coast. It's our capital. A week's ride to the east is Trade Meet, a bustling city where merchants of many nations meet. It lies at the foot of the mountain separating Cardry and Matic." "Do you think Castle Cardry would have a library or something that I could use?" "Most likely, though it's unlikely you would be permitted inside. Only nobles or known scholars are allowed entry, or so I hear." "Well, it wouldn't hurt to try." He finished his breakfast, and together they went to saddle the horses. James did a decent job this time, proud that he hadn't required Corbin's help. He climbed into the saddle and directed his horse out of the barn. The kids were there with Mary as he neared the house. She came up to him and handed him a sack filled with bread, dried meat, and fruits. He took the sack and gave her his heartfelt thanks. Devin brought out James's spear and backpack. James grabbed the backpack, but told him to keep the spear. "I don't think I will need that. You keep it." Devin smiled and nodded, admiring his new spear. He looked to Mary. "I appreciate your hospitality and have enjoyed being here more than you know. Goodbye, James, and be careful." "I will," he assured her. With a chorus of goodbyes, James turned his horse and followed Corbin down the lane. Looking back, he saw Elizabeth and Sienna still waving goodbye. He raised a hand and waved back, then turned and caught up with Corbin. The dogs followed, barking and jumping until the end of the lane. He and Corbin rode side by side as they continued on into town. Upon reaching the outskirts, they saw a column of soldiers marching eastward along the main road. "Who were they?" "Cardry soldiers." "Cardry soldiers," Corbin replied. "They must be headed east to reinforce Dragon's Pass. The siege is still raging at Saragon, at least that's the rumor. If it falls, the Empire may swing our way. Doubtful, but best be prepared." "I suppose so." Once the soldiers passed, they made their way to Alexander's. They found Alexander at the counter dealing with an elderly woman. They waited a few moments until she concluded her business. When she was done and turned to leave, James stepped to the counter. Alexander grinned at his approach. Why, it's James. How may I be of service? I'm leaving town, so I need to withdraw the rest of my money. Very well, Alexander said. 1,000 gold pieces is a lot to carry around with you. If you prefer, I could give you a letter of account. Such a letter would be honored by any money lender in Cardry. It would be less bulky than a chest full of coins that any robber would surely take an interest in. That sounds like a good idea. Give me another 100 gold to take with me and the rest in a letter of account. That should last me until I get to Cardry. You're headed to the city of Cardry, then? I plan to head in that direction. My brother has a money lender establishment in Cardry, he explained. I'm sure he'd be more than willing to cash this for you. You can find him in the merchant's quarter of the outer ring. I'll look him up when I get there. Very good. I shall be but a moment. Alexander disappeared into the back. It didn't take long before he returned with the pouch of coins and the letter. Together they counted the money. Both verified that James was indeed receiving the correct amount. Always count the money. I mean, that just goes without saying. Because if the money's, once you walk away, if the money's wrong, how can you prove it? So, anytime there's a transaction of money, at the bank, they always count it for you to make sure you know it's the right. They both know in that moment it's right. So you can't come back and say, well, you're $5 short. Now, if you come back, if you walk 10 feet away, turn around, come back, you're $5 short, banks probably won't say boob about that. Anyway, always make sure the money's right. Next to Alexander's was the chandler's shop, where a variety of equipment and supplies for travel were sold. Inside, they found items like bags, cloaks, and belts displayed throughout the shop. An open counter lined most of one wall, and a portly man stood behind it. When they entered, he said, "A good day to you, Corbin. How may I help you?" "Not for me, Burl, but for James." Burl's eyes widened as he appraised Corbin's companion. "James? Not the same James who rescued Jake's little girl?" James nodded. "I guess so. I need some equipment." "What are you looking for?" He described the items he thought he was going to need. Then Corbin and the chandler proceeded to tell him what he would really need, including several sets of clothes. Together they compiled a list of travel essentials. When asked how much for the lot, the chandler replied, "Jake came in yesterday and told me that if you wanted anything, that I was to charge him for it. He said it was the least he could do to repay you." Turning to Corbin, James looked questioningly at him. "While you recovered, he stopped by to talk to you, but we thought it best not to disturb your rest," he explained. "He said he wanted to repay you in some way. I explained that you would need equipment and supplies when you left, seeing as how you didn't have anything when you arrived. He must have come down here and set this up with Burl." "That's right," agreed Burl. "He did." "Okay, I got it." Collecting his new equipment, he said to the chandler, "Thank you for your help. You are most welcome." With arms full, he exited the shop and began packing and redistributing his new acquisitions upon his horse until he had a balanced load. As he got ready to mount, Corbin stopped him. "Here," he offered James a knife in a simple leather sheath. "This has been collecting dust the last few years, and I'd like you to have it. You'll need it more than I." He took the knife, pulled the blade from the scabbard, and found the metal well polished with a sharp edge. He reinserted it into the scabbard and hooked it onto his belt. Once his belt was buckled securely around him, he positioned the knife scabbard in a comfortable position. Having it on his hip made him feel pretty darn good. "Thanks, Corbin." He reached out his hand and shook Corbin's. "I appreciate all that you've done. I'll drop by if I'm ever back in the area again." "You're always welcome," Corbin said. "You take care now." Now, about the knife. Well, most adventurers need some kind of knife. But my kid's grandfather, a Choctaw that my mom married about 43 years ago, and who was the only real grandfather to my kids, he always said that a man always should have a knife in his pocket. And he gave me a knife early on. I don't always carry a knife in my pocket, but he always felt a man should always have a knife in his pocket. And this is kind of like a nod to him, you might say, that I mentioned the knife. He was a great man. And I'll probably make videos about him at some point, but they'll probably be posted on TikTok, not here, because YouTube is going to be nearly all about the book and writing and all that kind of stuff. All right, James mounted, turned the horse in the direction of the South Road, and cantered out of town. Traveling down along the Kelowna River was peaceful and enjoyable. The road had been well maintained and made for easy riding. It was a clear and sunny day with a slight breeze, too warm for more than a shirt. James rode along and covered the miles quickly. According to Corbin, it was 2 days to Bairn. As the day progressed, he passed several travelers, some alone and others in a group. Late in the morning, he encountered one caravan with 10 wagons and about as many guards. The teamsters waved as he passed, while the guards only glared. The lead wagon was not the same flatbed as the others, but a wagon covered with a deep blue canvas. A 4-horse team pulled it, which made him think of the covered wagons in the old Western movies. The wagon was being driven by a young lady who looked about 16. On the seat next to her sat an older man, most likely her father. As James pulled abreast of the wagon, the lady said, "Good day to you, sir." Smiling his most charming smile, James replied, "And a nice day to you too, ma'am." The man looked at him up and down, his expression suggesting that he found James somewhat lacking, as any father would do of a man who is taking notice of his daughter. He nodded a greeting but didn't say anything. "Where are you bound?" the lady asked him. "South to Burns, and perhaps to the coast," he replied. "By the way, my name is James." He gave her a slight bow. "I am called Celienda." Gesturing to the man next to her, he added, "This is my father, Meredith." Bowing slightly, this time to her father, he gave his respects. "Are you traveling to Bairn?" "Oh, yes. Our home is there, but we transport goods to various towns, depending on the markets." "Could you perhaps tell me of a good inn where I might stay? I have never been to Bairn." Thinking a bit, she said, "The Flying Swan is good and well priced. The owner is a friend of ours by the name of Jillian. If you should stay there, tell him Celienda sends her wishes." "I will, and thank you for your help." "Maybe we'll run into each other while I am there," suggested James with a grin. Her father gave him a cold look that said such was not likely, and he was not to be looked forward to. "You never know," responded Celienda with a cheerful smile. He gave them another slight bow of the head and said, "May your travels be profitable and safe." He sped his horse up to a canter and pulled away from the caravan. "Fare you well, James," he heard Celienda call after him. Didn't take long before they vanished in the distance behind. When the sun reached its apex, James stopped to let his horse graze while he had a bite to eat. He found a shady spot not far from the river, removed the sack Mary gave him, and settled against the bole of a tree. His posterior had been complaining for the last hour from the saddle, but he would have to get used to being in the saddle all day. In this world, it seemed to be the preferred mode of transportation. While he ate, he thought how peaceful and calm it was by the river. Pulling the medallion from beneath his shirt, he again contemplated the design upon its face. Questions and still more questions with very few answers. He sighed, replaced the medallion beneath his shirt, and finished his meal. The rest of the afternoon was a repeat of the morning, except that the pain in his bottom grew more pronounced as the day wore on. When the sun was but an hour away from the horizon, several buildings appeared in the distance. Two looked to be houses or storage sheds, while a third stood 2 stories tall with smoke coming out of the chimney. Another long building sat behind it. As he drew closer, he made out a sign of a river turning a bend, which hung in front of the large 2-story building. Must be an inn, he thought. Since night was quickly approaching, he figured this would be a good spot to stop. He secured his horse to the hitching post and entered. The smell of unwashed bodies and smoke took his breath away. His eyes started to water, and he could barely breathe. Pausing there in the doorway for a second, he slowly acclimated to the stench. Looking around, he noticed several tables in the common area. He slowly acclimated. Well, one was unoccupied. A long bar ran along the wall. To the rear of the room, a stairway climbed to the second floor. Now, James went from Earth and California, which hygiene is a major thing. 200 years ago, not so much. But now, people bathe daily, deodorant, streets are clean. Now, in this world, it's back in the medieval times, So people wash once a week, maybe. I've heard stories about how people thought that washing was actually bad for the body. So, yeah, stench was pretty bad. Fortunately, the unoccupied table was near an open window. He took a seat which enabled him to sit with his back to the wall so he could view the entire common room. He leaned his head against the wall near the open window for the fresh air coming through. He didn't have long to wait until the serving girl came over. That's something I always do. when I go to a restaurant, back to the wall, and I want the entire restaurant in my field of view. I mean, most times you can't do that, but if I can, I will do that every time because I don't like the people behind me because you don't know what's coming on. And if someone's going and you want to be near the back because if someone's going to rob the place, you want to have time to slip your wallet out, get your credit card, your ID out, stick them in your sock, put your wallet back. So when they come to take your wallet, all they get is an empty wallet with a few bills in it. Hi, I'm Melinda. What can I get you? What do you have? There are 2 choices for dinner, she explained, mutton stew or roast beef. The stew is 2 coppers, the roast beef 3. I take the roast beef. Some have said the mutton is bet on the tough side. I'll take the roast beef then and some ale. How much for a room? I also have a horse. A silver a night and 2 coppers for the stall. If you need feed for your horse, that's another copper. Reaching into his travel purse, he pulled out 2 silvers and handed them to her. She took them and said, I'll be right back. She walked to the man behind the counter and his coins changed hands. The man handed her back several coppers and she gave him his change. The stall for your horse is the 3rd from the right. If you need feed for your horse, just give a copper to Ferric when you stable your horse. He is the stableman. Gesturing to the stairs, she added, your room is up the stairs, 2nd on the left. Despite being in close proximity to the window, he couldn't stand the stench in the common room any longer. I'll take care of my horse first and retire to my room, he explained. Would it be possible for my meal to be delivered to my room after I finish settling in my horse? Certainly, she said. When you return from the stable, let me know and I'll bring it up myself. She gave him a wink and knowing smile before walking to another table where a customer was signaling to her. James hurried out the door into the cool, refreshing evening, taking a couple deep breaths. Haven't these people ever heard of baths? I suppose I better get used to it. They're not very hygienic here. They're not. Most people would work in the fields all day, come back, maybe wash their face, hands. If they're lucky, they're pits, but probably not. He untied his horse and led him around the side of the stable. He found a man filling the feed bins in several of the stalls. Are you Ferric, the stableman? That's me. What can I do for you? Melinda said I was to have the 3rd stall from the right. Digging into his travel purse, James handed him a copper. This is for feed. Taking the copper, Ferric took charge of James's horse. The stall was roomy and filled with clean straw. The stall was roomy and filled with clean straw. At the rear was an area for storing the tack and saddle. James took down a brush hanging on the wall and proceeded to brush his horse's coat. When he finished, Ferric arrived with a pail of feed. He'll be fine, assured Ferric as he poured the grain into the feed bin. My room is at the end of the stable, so I can hear if there is any trouble. Should trouble or problems arise, I will send for you. Giving him another copper, James said, Thank you. He turned his horse, patted him, and said, I'll see you in the morning. With one last rub along the neck, he left the stable and headed for the inn. James signaled to Melinda upon his return, indicating that he would like his dinner brought up. Nodding, she finished with the customer and hurried into the kitchen. He climbed the stairs and found a long hallway which stretched the length of the building. 4 doors lined each side and an oil lamp burned at either end. The flickering of the small flames did little to banish the growing shadows. Coming to the 2nd door on the left, he opened it and went inside. The room was somewhat dark. The window faced east and the sun had been dipping below the horizon. A single candle sat in a candlestick on the middle of a small table. He tried a simple spell to light the candle's wick. Candle wick, light quick. Yeah, sometimes the rhymes are fairly simple, but hey, if it works, why worry about long, flowing, poetic muse, right? Just get the job done, get her done, right, so to speak, and let's move on. A barely perceptible surge of power flew from James, and the wick burst into flame, giving off a comfortable light. He set his backpack and travel bags in the far corner, and then sat on the bed. It was sort of soft with a few lumps. The sheets and pillows were stained, but not entirely clean. The room, though small, didn't feel cramped. Aside from the bed, there was a small table with 2 chairs. Getting up from the bed, he opened the window to let in fresh air. He found that it overlooked the stable and courtyard below. The window now open, the noise from the common room was more pronounced. It was not long until he heard a knock. Opening the door, he found Melinda carrying a tray of food balanced on one hand with a flagon of ale held in the other. He took the tray and set it on the table. She brought his ale and asked if there was anything else he would like. No, not right now, thank you. I'll be back in a while to remove the tray. With that, she left him to his dinner. The roast beef was surprisingly good, not too tough and a little juicy. The half loaf of bread that came with the roast beef was somewhat fresh, with a hint of nuttiness about it. Didn't take him long to finish the meal. After sopping the last bit of juice with a chunk of bread, he stretched out on the bed. He lay there a while thinking about the last few days and where the next ones would take him. Knock, knock. Not wanting to get up, he hollered, "Come in." The door opened and Melian entered. "Is there anything else you require?" "Nothing, thank you." Coming over, she sat on the bed next to him. "Are you sure there's nothing else that you want?" She put a hand on his leg and gave him a look that left little doubt what else was available. With a state of personal hygiene that he had been seeing since coming to this world on his mind, he said, "No, not tonight, I'm afraid." She got off the bed and gave him a disappointed look as she went to gather the dinnerware. "I'll be around all night if you just change your mind." Turning, she walked out the door, closing it behind her. James got up and hurried to secure the lock. He blew out the candle and then got undressed before crawling into bed. He fervently hoped there would be no biting bed bugs as he slowly drifted off to sleep. I mean, if hygiene is questionable, well, obviously laundering is going to be questionable. I mean, a high-class inn would probably be pristine and clean, yes. But an inn on the side of the road, I mean, probably when someone got up and left the room, they would go in and if nothing was really bad, they would just kind of brush the hairs out of the bed and just make it for the next person. So, yeah. We're talking Middle Ages here. It might have been cleaner back then, but I just have a feeling it was this way. And even today, some hotels, the less starred hotels, probably do that too. I always check my beds. Very carefully before I get into them. The morning dawned bright and sunny. The sunlight came through his window and awakened him from a dream of home. Getting up, he quickly dressed and gathered his things. He then headed downstairs for breakfast. There were a few people eating. He made his way to the same table where he had sat the night before. It didn't take long before he was enjoying a breakfast of ham, steak, potatoes, and eggs. While he ate, he noticed two gentlemen at a table in the midst of a friendly conversation. One was in his mid-40s, and the other was a younger man, perhaps early 20s. They looked like father and son, both dark-haired and dressed well. James noticed another man sitting alone at a table in the corner. He wasn't eating, just having a drink. He soon realized that the man in the corner was taking an unusual interest in the two men. His clothes were a bit ragged and his face unshaven, his hair uncombed. His eyes never stayed on the two men for any length of time, but James noticed that they returned to rest upon them often. Finishing his meal, James sat back and took his time with his drink, wondering what the man in the corner was up to. He relaxed and waited. Sipping his ale, it was almost gone when the two men finished their meal and headed out the door to the stables. James saw the man's attention completely focused on the two men. As they exited, the man got up and followed them out. Curious, James peered through a door to see what was going on. The two men entered the stables while the single man made his way to a window on the side of the stable and looked inside. The man glanced through the window and then quickly looked around the courtyard. James ducked from the doorway and then peered around again a second later. He saw that the man was walking around to the stable door where he slipped inside. James hurried across the courtyard to the stable's door. Coming from the stables, he heard hushed voices, unable to make out the words. Nearing the entrance, he began to make out what was being said. "Now," said a commencing voice. "Here, take it. Just don't hurt us." James recognized the voice of the older of the two gentlemen. Watching curiously, he saw the older man handing a purse to the robber. The robber stood with sword drawn, the point scant inches from the chest of the younger man. Taking the purse, he gauged the weight of the coins, then placed it inside his tunic. "Thank you, gentlemen," the robber said. He began backing slowly towards James, his sword still leveled at the two men. James quickly looked around and saw a pile of broken boards next to the stable. He took a 2-foot piece and then stood ready to wallop the robber as he exited. He heard the robber come closer. When he judged that the robber was close enough, James swung the board with all his might and felt a soft thud as it connected with the back of the robber. The man stumbled forward from the force of the unexpected blow, his sword sailing out of his hand. His foot caught on something and he lost his balance. Falling to the floor, he quickly rolled and regained his feet, knife drawn. The two men, though surprised though surprised by James's attack, drew swords and advanced on the robber. The robber realized his advantage was lost and left his sword on the ground. Making a quick leap through the window, he hit the ground on the other side. "Thief!" the older man yelled. The younger man started running for the door where James stood and gave chase to the robber. James glanced toward the robber as he gained his feet, and for a short second their eyes locked. He could see the ape behind those eyes directed at him. Then the robber ran to a saddled horse tied to the hitching post. The younger man rushed through the door and raced after, but not fast enough before the robber mounted his horse. Spurring him to a gallop, the robber quickly raced between the buildings and was soon out of sight. The older gentleman came to James and held his hand out. "Thank you, sir." "You're welcome. I'm just sorry he got away." Taking the hand, he shook it. Holding up the pouch, the man said, "When you struck them, our money fell from his tunic. We are in your debt." "Did you know him?" The younger one replied, "No." Looking at the older man, he asked, "Have you seen him before, father?" "No, but I'll know him if I ever see him again." Looking around, the father stared at the courtyard, empty except for themselves and James. No one had bothered themselves to come and give aid when he called thief. "I guess we are lucky not all people are cowards. My name's Renlund. This is my son, Kenny. We're headed north if you care to travel with us." Smiling at the offer, James shook his head. "No, thank you. I'm on my way south to Bern. My name is James." "Well, James, if you're ever in Ilion, you are welcome to our hospitality. We own and operate an iron mine and smelter. Maybe you have heard of us? Renlund's Iron?" "No, sorry, never heard of it. I'm new to the area," he explained. "I will definitely stop by should I be that way." Digging into his purse, he handed James 2 gold coins. "Here, take this with our gratitude." Taking the gold, he said, "Well, thank you." Okay, this was my first unintentional plot seed. When I first started writing the Morcyth Saga, I wanted something interesting in every chapter. And so James sitting in an inn, just traveling down the road, boring, right? I mean, it needs to happen, but let's give it a little bit of oomph. So I said, well, let's have James, foil a robbery and have a little bit of action, just kind of get things fun. And so I got these guys. Now later on in the series, I don't know, book 4 or 5, one of those two, his path takes him to Ilion, and he looks up these 2 guys, and he gets a pair of knives that are really good, really superior quality for Juron, his friend that he acquires in book 2. So plot seed. No, it's just a small plot seed, but I do like to put things in. Now I do it intentionally. But back then I was just throwing things in that would keep the action going, have things interesting happening, have James get more used to magic or whatever. And then as I wrote the series, I realized I had been doing that, and then I started pulling those to do plots later on in the series. So thus I started calling them plot seeds. And yeah, makes you think, like in Morcyth Saga, by the end of it, you're thinking, man, this guy had this grand vision. He's awesome. No, not really. I was just good at pulling from inconsequential scenes early in the series for things later in the series, and so it makes people think I have some grand design. When now I do. Now I knew what I was doing back then, and I'm doing it now. So, yeah. Placing the gold with his other coins, he went to check on his horse. Finding him having been well cared for, he saddled him and walked him to the hitching post near the front of the inn. He returned to the inn to gather his belongings he left by the table. Leaving the inn, he spied Renlund and his son and waved goodbye. James soon put the inn far behind as he continued on his way south. On the road again, he began singing one of his favorite songs. Spirits once again high, he brought his horse to a trot and exhilarated in his freedom. No demands, no tests, no grandparents pushing him to get a job. What could be better? The rest of the day went by uneventfully. Long before Bern appeared on the horizon, the untamed countryside turned into farmland with hard-working farmers out in their fields. By the time Bern finally appeared in the distance, evening was only a couple hours away. 2 days, just as Corbin said. He found Bern to be much larger than Trendle. The city stretched for over a mile to the east of the river and probably half as much on the west. A large bridge spanned the river near the center of the city and a smaller one further to the south. An encircling wall gave the city a measure of security and protection. The road passed through a gate in the north wall, which allowed entry into the city. Several guards at the gate maintained order, occasionally pulling aside travelers and asking questions. As James approached, one came over and stated, "Welcome to Bern. Please state your name and reason for visiting." The guard looked bored as if he had asked this question 1,000 times today. "My name is James. I am just passing through, though I plan on staying the night at the Flying Swan, maybe a day or two at most." The guard nodded, made a quick notation on a piece of paper, and then waved James on through. On the other side, merchant stalls lined the streets, each with a loud proprietor enticing passersby to buy their goods. Some stopped to inspect the goods, while others pointedly ignored them as they attempted to get by without being hassled. Several street boys came up to James, each pitching where they could take him. "Come with me, sir, and I can take you to the prettiest girls in town," one lad offered. "His girls are the ugliest," yelled another. "Come to Bannis, and you'll see the best." Holding up his hand for quiet, James asked, "Can one of you take me to the Flying Swan?" Several hands flew into the air, and he pointed to one of about 13. The boy headed off with James, following close behind. The boy took him down several streets and then headed west, crossing over the big bridge seen earlier. The boy occasionally glanced back to make sure he hadn't lost him. They arrived at a building bearing a colorful sign depicting a white swan in flight over a lake. The boy stopped in front of the Flying Swan and said, "Here you are, sir." James reached into his pocket and took out 2 coppers and tossed them to the boy. Catching the coins, the boy seemed satisfied. "Do you need any more help, sir?" "Not right now, and thank you for your assistance. If you have ever need of a guide while you're here, come to the gate where we met. My name is Myco." Yes, the fateful meeting of Myco and James. And Myco, as you know, plays an important part in everything, and he's there in every book with James. I like Myco. James considered the offer. "Maybe tomorrow morning you can meet me here. I have a few things I need, and maybe you could help me find what I require." Smiling, the boy replied, "Okay, I'll be here bright and early." "I'll see you then, Myco." The boy turned and scampered back into the crowd. In a flash, he was gone. "Nice boy," James thought to himself. He tied his horse to the hitching post and walked into the Flying Swan. There ends chapter 6. Now, in this moment, did I think Myco was going to turn out the way he did? No. Myco was just some kid. Even when I wrote this part, I had no idea he was going to be more than just a guy in Bern. But the way when I'm typing, things just come to me, and one thing builds on another, builds on another, builds on another, and before you know it, boom, this big story has unfolded. I had no plans for Myco. I had no thoughts beyond this. Just, James needed someone to show him around, and kids in old towns are always trying to. I was trying to earn some coins to by helping out people, guys and stuff like that. So I threw that in there too. And having a local guide can't be a bad thing. And a kid, he won't be. James won't have to worry too much about him, overpowering him or robbing him, because he's just a kid. So, yeah. So James is in Bern. He's feeling good. He's got money in his pocket, freedom, much more than he would ever have had back in Haviston, California. Because back there, he's just a kid. Here, people are calling him sir, treating him with respect, and he kind of likes that. So tomorrow we'll do chapter 7 and see what happens. Thank you for following me. If you're interested in the Morcyth Saga, if you have not read this book yet, you can get the download at Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Apple, whatever. Pretty much everywhere ebooks can be downloaded. You can find the Unsuspecting Mage, book 1 of the Morcyth Saga, free to download. And if by chance the Amazon you want to use, if it's not free there, then look for your local, look for the Apple you can use or the Barnes & Noble, because they will be free. The way things are set up between the two distributors, because Amazon goes to Amazon, Smashwords, my publisher, goes to everybody else, and at Smashwords I can set it for free, and everybody will have it for free. They should have it for free through, and Smashwords does Barnes & Noble, Apple, Kobo, If it's not Barnes and Noble, if it's not Amazon, most likely Smashwords is distributing to them, and this book will be free for free download. So give it a try. And I'll see you tomorrow for the next chapter. You have a good day.